Awesome. Awesome. So back on Beyond the Box here, Mike McCary, your co-host, and today I'm joined with the esteemed Jeff Turner, entrepreneur in residence with Second Century Ventures, among many other things. Jeff, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here. How are you?
I am fantastic. It's sunny. It's summer. There's obviously lots of things going on, but all things considered, I'm great. How are you?
Same, same.
Yeah.
Got in a great hike this morning, so life is good.
There you go. If you start a day with a hike, that's you're doing something right.
I would agree. I would agree.
So for those people who don't know you or haven't had the privilege to know you,
Sure.
Jeff, so maybe give me a little bit of a background. Who is Jeff Turner? How did you get to where you
Oh wow.
are?
It's funny. You could take 2 hours explaining how you get to where you are in your life, or you could condense it into 30 seconds. So I'll choose the second option. Uh, I've been an entrepreneur almost the entirety of my adult life. I started my first company when I was 24, 25 years old. Um, I sold that company in 1999. So,
Good timing.
yeah, I've been at this a long time. My first real estate startup was a company called Real Estate Shows, which was the first company really to take the Ken Burns effect and apply it to static images to create a new kind of virtual tour. That company is still in existence. I sold it to one of my partners back in 2011 when I discovered, I like to say discovered because it makes me feel like an adventurer. I was speaking at the Australian real estate conference at AREC in Sydney, Australia, and just happened to be on the showroom floor doing a podcast with a guy named Kevin Turner, no relation, and a company logo was behind my head during this entire podcast, and it was called Real Satisfied. And I talked to the founders afterwards, curious about what they did. It just happened to be their first show that they had gone to. They had just launched in Australia, and it was an agent customer satisfaction survey, which I found interesting. It was different than what was happening in the United States in agent ratings back in the time. I don't know if you remember back then, but Houston had just forayed into agent ratings on their website. Zillow was just barely getting started with agent ratings. And I thought their approach was really, really thoughtful, the way they handled it. So I asked them right there and then, have you thought about bringing this to the US? They said, no. I said, I think you should. Long story short, we ended up bringing Real Satisfied over to the United States, sold it in 2016. I've been a mentor with the REACH program since its inception in 2013, and as a result have sort of found a fondness for mentoring startup entrepreneurs. I have an affinity for it, and as a result, approached Dave and Tyler, who sort of head up Second Century Ventures, with some ideas on what I thought was missing from the REACH program. This was after I had met Ralph von Grafenstein, who is the founder of immoviewer, which was the first international company to be accepted into the REACH program, based in Potsdam, Germany, and took over as North American CEO for a year to help them launch the product into a different marketplace. What I really felt was missing was an attempt by REACH, or a visible attempt. What I couldn't see at the time, and you'll laugh at this now because you see behind the curtain of what's going on, a desire to bring in more companies from other countries, and a desire to connect with companies that weren't quite ready for the REACH program. And as it turned out, and as you now know, they had already been talking about those kinds of things. So it excited me to be able to potentially participate in helping them expand, taking an active role on a part-time basis with Second Century Ventures, and specifically with the REACH and the Growth Accelerator, not dissimilar probably to how you got attracted into the same position. and a desire to go deeper into helping these companies grow and really understand the complexities of the North American real estate market. So that's where I find myself today. I keep myself busy wearing multiple hats. We talked about it before we started recording. I still spend a good portion of my time consulting with immoviewer and now DocuSketch, the product that we created to go into the restoration market. I consult with a couple of different startups in Europe as well. I also am entrepreneur in residence with Second Century Ventures, and with my former partners at Real Satisfied in Australia, we're also building a new association management platform from scratch on some modern technology that I'm really very excited about. So
Wow.
life is busy.
Do you sleep?
Yeah, I do sleep, and that took longer than 30 seconds, I realize now.
That's amazing though, because there's so much to work from there. And it's almost, it's interesting because I've been talking to a lot of people about travel, just as an aside.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are starting to read more like adventure books, more travel books. But you're getting that travel element by working with startups abroad.
Yeah, no,
you're getting that taste of it.
It's funny. It's really been very, very interesting. As I've had the opportunity to work with founders from other countries, the difference in the thought processes that exist, that's sometimes shaped by the culture itself, and sometimes it's shaped by the fact that the real estate industry just works differently in those countries than it works in the United States. And I think sometimes, not sometimes, all the time, those differences in experiences allow us to create unique things. It changes the nature of conversations. It changes the way you speak about things, because you're having to constantly sort of check your own understanding of what the world looks like at the door, and listen to someone else explain how they think the world works. And I find that refreshing and entertaining and challenging.
Keeps the days not boring, right? Not repetitive.
Yeah. And it makes me better. I mean, it makes me sharper.
So on that thread, then I guess it's a nice segue, because obviously right now with everything that's going on, there's so much uncertainty.
Yeah.
The economy, and society, on travel, immigration, all these different things, and you have this really unique lens because you are sort of consulting with all these different companies abroad, locally in the U.S. as well. I'd be really curious to get your take on how each respective sort of region is kind of viewing that uncertainty and how they're dealing with it. Because obviously, as as an entrepreneur, we deal with uncertainty all the time. But obviously, that comes back to your culture too. And so I'd be really interested, maybe we could speak to
Sure.
how the Europeans are viewing it, how the Americans are viewing it, the Australians, and I think that'd be very interesting.
Well, it won't surprise you that Europeans think we're crazy. I'll say this, because I deal almost exclusively in my business relationship with entrepreneurs, I don't have a lot of diversity in opinion on how to deal with this. You said it squarely. As an entrepreneur, you're used to dealing with uncertainty. It's always there.
Yeah.
If starting a company came with certainty, everybody would do it. It is that uncertainty which sort of, weeds out certain types of personalities, typically, from even deciding to venture into entrepreneurship. And so there is a certain makeup of an entrepreneur that allows them to handle these kinds of situations. I won't say better, I'll say from a different perspective than most people do. That constant of uncertainty that's a part of starting a business doesn't really change much when another piece of uncertainty is thrown into the mix.
Just put it on the pile.
Yeah, no, really, and I don't mean that to sound trite in any way. It's just another layer of uncertainty that gets added into the already multiple layers of uncertainty that exist, especially at very, very early stages of a startup,
right,
when you're really just trying to figure out whether or not your product will even work in a specific vertical. I mean, I know we've talked about this in various situations. across all of Second Century Ventures and the Reach Global Networks. It's an interesting task to sort of go through the process of vetting a company for inclusion in one of our Reach classes, because there's uncertainty on our side of the table as well, just as there's uncertainty, but you sort of level all of that out with your experience and your understanding of a market. And I think the thing that I'm seeing from leadership that I engage with outside of the entrepreneurs, but inside of the real estate industry, is that the leaders who are responding best to this are the ones who seem to be able to easily gravitate towards relaxing a bit and drawing from their experience to calm themselves down, to say, we've been through bad times before, we've been through uncertain times before, here's how we handled it in the past, here's how we're going to do it in the future, this is what I need to be doing. And the panic that sometimes sit in and uncertainty doesn't sit in with those leaders.
Well, it's one of those things where, traditionally we're business plans, strat plans, and obviously in the entrepreneurial space, business plans don't exist anymore. It's, business model canvases, pitch decks, something that's, because the idea is you have to pivot, you have to iterate, you have to learn. It's all that uncertainty. But with the corporates, the larger association players, the big franchises, they are still in that business model strat plan. And when the world comes and, slaps you in the face, for lack of a better analogy, and that goes out the window, you absolutely have to do that. And, I wonder if it would be really interesting to hear, how that sort of parallels back to when you're entering a new market, because you've brought in a lot of companies to the US, right? And kind of coming in there. So I'd be curious on that.
I think it's similar, for example, the Australian, well, let's talk about immoviewer and the German market. Immoviewer launches in Germany with what is essentially a version of what real estate shows did, only in an automated way. So sort of think of Circle Pix or a company like that that's automating via a feed of images these slideshow videos. When they launched the 360 tours in Europe, it was met with some pretty decent adoption for one reason only. Most of the agents in Europe shoot their own photos. You bring the same exact technology over to the United States, where most agents don't shoot their own photos, and the adoption is not the same. And so it's just that single difference in behavior ends up throwing you for a loop and forcing you to have to look at things in a completely different way. And so there are sometimes major differences between one market and another. In Australia, there's really no buyer side to the equation.
Right.
Vendors pay for advertising up front. Those are big differences.
Yeah.
In a market and how that shifts behavior. And so you have to sort of take a step back and say, okay, I've got to approach this differently. And thankfully,
go ahead. Thankfully.
No, and differently and thankfully. I think it sharpens both sides of the equation. Real Satisfied didn't really take off in Australia until it came and perfected itself in the United States in a different market.
It's funny you mention that, because what I know of Real Satisfied, my first exposure to them was their partnership with, I believe, C21, at least here in Canada. And so, all the C21 agents all of a sudden had these Real Satisfied posts everywhere. Yeah. And I was, oh, that's interesting. Like, how do they do that? Because, prior to that, the prevailing sort of, notion on reviews and ratings was that it was going to be, and kind of perceived negatively. And then you had Century 21 agents actually actively promoting it, to your point of earlier, where it was this unique tilt that really did it thoughtfully. Right. But to get there, I can only imagine the learning it took.
I mean, it required a bit of an educational shift. And I think because the way Real Satisfied approached it, using a survey model where we're really going deeper into identifying what parts of the transaction were performed well, what parts weren't performed well. You gave the option for the consumer to provide constructive feedback that didn't necessarily, it's possible for you to be very, very happy with a transaction and still want to be able to, and still capable of providing constructive feedback to the agent. If the only thing you're trying to assess is a 4 or 5 star rating, and you're forcing me to give an overview of the entire transaction based upon the accumulation of that experience. If the last experience I had was bad, I'm going to rate you lower. This allowed us to create, I think, a more accurate picture of what took place throughout the entire transaction. I think as a result, agents felt more comfortable with it, and certainly brokers felt more comfortable with it because they had access to data that actually helped them improve their processes.
Which is so crazy, because you take this thing that's almost perceived as largely negative reviews, right? It was at one point, and position it as this opportunity where now it's helping not just great product, so it's great on the tech side, but it is helping grow and get that constructive feedback to actually increase and enhance the consumer's experience, right? So on that thread, I want to change gears a little bit, but right now we're in a negative, what is really a negative time. I think it's very fair to say negative from the fact that there's a lot of things happening, right? Pandemic, societal changes. However, I would really be curious on, the entrepreneurs, the optimistic view on what hopefully this can do for us kind of going forward, and how we can look at these opportunities to really capture this and make those positive changes, much like you've done in the past with products.
Yeah, no, listen, so I think there's an interesting dynamic that's taking place today that is important to understand, that we're going through this global pandemic globally. We see shifts sometimes that take place in technology that are driven by one side or the other. So consumers gravitate towards social media. They sort of drag agents towards social media. We see agents adopt a specific technology, and they want to try and drag consumers into that technology as well. And in this case, everyone's being dragged towards certain kinds of technologies by the necessity of what has to be done during this global pandemic. And I was reading, there was an article in, I think it was IEEE Spectrum, or one of the tech journals that I was reading, that was talking about whether or not the coronavirus pandemic was going to make early adopters out of all of us, because these stay-at-home orders were triggering this boom in the use of consumer technology on both sides of the equation. And I think that's going to be good for the real estate industry long term. I think there's going to be a positive impact of both the consumer and the realtor engaging in the use of these consumer technologies, these technologies that may have been seen as business only, like Zoom, for example. We're sitting here on a Zoom meeting, that if I would have walked up and down my cul-de-sac 4 months ago and said, "Hey, have you ever used Zoom?" They'd look at me like I had a third eye. But if I do that today, I guarantee you every single human being on this street would be able to describe to me what Zoom was. And I think that's a really unique and interesting dynamic that is going to drive the adoption of technology and make people less technology averse as a result. They're all being forced towards it, and now they've touched these new technologies, they've felt them. There's an ease that's coming about as a result of it that I'm actually hopeful. Yes, it's a bad time, but I'm hopeful that it actually drives more early adoption of technology.
So then, just to take it back to the real estate industry specifically before this, though, because one of the big things that people always talk about is that as a relationship-based industry, it's all about human connection. It's all about the face-to-face. For those people that are saying, well, their technology is great, but I don't want it to replace the human element. What's your take? Do you think it could ever replace the human element?
No, I don't think it'll replace it entirely. But I also think that we spent we wasted time on certain things that we didn't need to waste time on. I look at virtual tours as a good example of this. Virtual tours were always judged and have always been judged, and they may, this may not change behavior, but they were always judged on the marketing side of the equation. I don't need to do a virtual tour to sell a home, even though the vast majority of consumers, like 84% of consumers, said, I want to see a virtual tour before I go visit a home. 2 years ago, less than 3% of homes had an actual virtual tour. And I just did the count again 2 weeks ago. I went on to and Realtor.com has an investment in Matterport. So they have an investment.
If anyone's going to have them, they've got
it.
If
anyone's going to have them, they're going to have it. It's still less than 5%. We're sitting in the middle of a global pandemic where people can't get out and do it. And it's still less than 5%. But here's the thing. Other forms of what I'll call virtual tours have begun to emerge as well. The ability to do a virtual open house by taking a camera in and walking around, using a Zoom meeting to hold a virtual open house. I think if we feed this through the lens of both efficiency and the ability to make certain that we're delivering what the consumer is looking for and needs, and now that the consumer is more comfortable with this, imagine now that I've got you on a Zoom meeting and I share my screen and I've got multiple virtual tours of homes that I have listed, and I can walk you through these listings, ask and answer your questions. I'm not diminishing the value of that relationship. I'm actually empowering a different kind of relationship. I'm taking advantage of the efficiencies that have come from being able to engage someone in a different way. And now I can show you 7 properties, walk you through them, answer your questions, and then take you out to the 2 that are most interesting to you. You see more, you get more benefit, I express my knowledge, and then transfer that into something that's more real when I have the opportunity to actually get face-to-face. I think those are the kinds of changes that we're going to see come about, where you shift thinking about a specific technology in one way and now begin to see it as a way to use it differently. And that's, I think virtual tours are a good example of where that might take place.
Yeah, I love that. And where my mind is kind of going on this is that not only do you get the efficiency, but you actually get the return on life on both sides. So both parties, the consumer and the realtor, now have that time to go to their kids', soccer practice, or play the piano together, or color, or whatever they're doing with their family, or work a little bit. And through this pandemic, there's a lot of things talking about efficiency and adoption, and all this is that ROI thing, right? Return on investment.
Agreed.
However, there's a component that I'm really excited about. It's the return on life. It's the no commuting. It's the lack of traffic. It's all these ancillaries that allow us to do it. And even if it's 10, 15 minutes more with our children, or whatever it may be, that's one of the things that I'm getting really excited about. And I think those are those secondary permutations down the line that could really be cool.
Agreed.
So I'm saying
honestly, that's been the promise of technology. Right. And I'm not certain it's technology's fault that we haven't taken advantage of it. If you understand what I'm saying, the notion that now we've been forced. I'm getting, as much as I'm like over zoomed. This is we said 9:30. This is my 4th Zoom already. It's 9:30 a.m. here in Southern California. I'm actually becoming more comfortable in them, even though I would rather do less of them.
Right.
Okay. So I know when I will want to use this in the future and when I will not want to use it in the future. And other technologies are going to be the same way. We've been talking about this oncoming surge of natural language processing chatbots that feel more human. One of the companies in this year's Reach class, Ylopo, has an AI system called Raya. And Raya uses certain elements of natural language processing to give you more of your lifetime back. I mean, no one wants to be constantly tied to their phone. If I'm sitting at my kid's baseball game or my kid's track meet and I've got a listing and there's somebody sitting out in front of that listing, if 90% of the questions they're going to ask could be answered by an intelligent chatbot, why shouldn't they be? why shouldn't that technology engage me when my expertise and my necessity to build relationships ends up coming to the fore and introduce me into that conversation at a more appropriate time? That's to me us taking advantage of the promises of technology in ways that give us back the things we're most longing for. And the thing I'm most longing for right now as a result of this pandemic is not more business meetings. That's not what I'm longing for. I'm getting plenty of business meetings in. What I'm longing for is the ability to go sit with friends and enjoy that social contact that I've been missing. And there's a part of me that believes that we're going to value that even more on the backside of this. We're going to want to have as much of it as we can have, and to use these technologies to deliver that for us.
I love it. And you know what? I feel the exact same way. And even on the natural language, I just turned Siri on my, I've had an iPhone since they came out, and I have been against it. And I consider myself an early adopter, but it just, the tech wasn't there, and I'm still a little bit fighting it. But
Yes.
the thing is, it's like,
well, and it's funny, it's not there on Apple. Like,
no.
Apple's way down low. Google's way better in their assistant from an accuracy standpoint.
Oh, it pains me.
Google's like 20% higher than Alexa even. Everybody's judging this by Alexa.
Yeah.
I remember a conversation at NAR in New Orleans between Bill Lublin, Bill Matter, and we were arguing about who was going to win this natural language processing war. Was it going to be Google or Amazon? I was arguing it was Google because they had better data. Bill was arguing that it was Amazon because they had so many devices, inside. I think I'm going to win that argument. I think Google's going to win on the natural language processing side.
I saw a GIF on Twitter the other day, and they had them side by side, and it was just Google was just crushing it. So.
Crushing it.
Yeah. On that, I think I've taken more time than I needed to, Jeff, but this has been awesome. Let's do it again. And thanks so much for coming on the show. Really.
Thanks for inviting me. I really, really appreciate it.
All right. Take care.